In all my years coaching, I've received one question more than any other. Travis, how are you so good looking? Just kidding. That's never once happened to me. Wishful thinking. No, here's the question. Isn't the stock market risky? And as we talked about in the last video, I would argue investing in individual stocks, it's really risky. For 99% of us, buying individual stocks isn't a lot different than gambling. We might win, but probably not. So as I previously mentioned, whenever we talk about investing, we're talking about investing in the stock market, not in individual stocks. If we're going to talk about risk, we should start by defining the word risk. And I found two main definitions. The first is a situation involving exposure to danger. That makes sense. Danger equals risk. And the stock market feels dangerous. Some of you may remember the stock market crash in 2001 caused by the tech bubble burst and then fueled by 9/11. Check this graph out. The stock market lost 46% in about 2 years. And if you don't remember that one, you surely remember the stock market crash in 2008, where the stock market lost 55% of its value in about 18 months. Wow, if you were invested in the stock market, you would have literally lost half of your money in just over a year. And it's probably fresh in your mind how the stock market lost about 32% over a very, very short 5-week span in early 2020 as COVID-19 started to spread globally. That's 1/3 of your money lost in just 5 weeks. That feels intense, and risky is definitely the word that comes to mind when I think of those three events. That brings us to the second definition I found for the word risk, the possibility of loss. That makes sense. If you're possibly going to lose money, that does feel risky. Which brings us back to the original question, isn't the stock market risky? And the examples I just shared, that would indicate the answer is yes. Besides those three examples, there were 14 other times since 1900 where the stock market fell by at least 10%. That's intense. And whenever the conversation of investing comes up, people ask the question, well, what if we have another recession? Here's one thing that we do know. We will. We will have another recession. It's just a part of the rhythm of a normal functioning economy. In fact, we've had 30 recessions over the last 150 years, and we're going to have many more over our lifetimes. And this is where I'd like to steer the ship in an entirely new direction. The key thing I want us to focus on when thinking about the 2001 stock market crash, the 2008 stock market crash, the 2020 stock market crash, the 14 other stock market crashes, and the dozens of recessions. They did happen. They were real. People got hurt. There's no denying that. But there's also something else that we should point out. The only people who lost in the stock market, and again, I'm referring to the people who were invested in the stock market, not individual stocks, were the people who panicked and sold. These were very profound events over short periods of time. And unfortunately, these are the events the mainstream news typically covers. That's not a knock on the news. These stories are indeed newsworthy, but the bigger picture gets lost in the process. Here's some facts I want to share with you. This is something I've been researching for more than a decade. As we mentioned earlier, the stock market has been around for more than 150 years. We have lots and lots of data. And over that 150-year history, the market has provided an annualized return of around 9%. And that's when people go back to, well, that's great and all, but what happens if the stock market crashes or we have a recession? 9% a year. That doesn't just include the good times. That includes 30 recessions, all the stock market crashes, many wars, the assassination of a president, 9/11, the tech bubble burst, and a global pandemic that shut down the entire world. All of that wrapped into one continuous timeline, up 9% per year. So whenever we talk about the risk of the stock market, I always say it's really risky over a short period of time and not very risky at all over a long period of time. And this is where people get really upset with me whenever I say the stock market has very little risk over a long period of time. But before you either blindly believe me or curse me out under your breath, I want to show you something. If we take all 150 years of the stock market and break it down into little chunks, we can see how it did. For example, if we want to see how the stock market performed over a 5-year period of time, we would start 5 years into the data and see what happened over that 5-year span. Then we would move ahead 1 year and see what happened over those 5 years. And we keep doing that over and over until we get to today. And we can see what happened over every 5-year period. So if we have 150 years of data, that means we have 145 5-year periods. Out of those 145 examples, 16 of them, so about 1 in 10, lost money. And in the worst example, you would have lost more than 11% per year. That's about half your money. Ouch, that feels risky. I have a 1 in 10 chance of losing money, and it could be a big loss. What about 10 years? How has the market done over 10-year periods? Using the same logic, we have 140 10-year periods to look at. Out of those 140, 3 of them, or about 2%, resulted in a loss. And it's fair to point out that the 2 were pretty recent. The 10 years ending in 2008 and the 10 years ending in 2009. In fact, the 10 years ending in 2008 was the worst 10-year period ever. You would have lost 1.4% per year. So a small loss. So if you look at it that way, it doesn't feel super risky, but there's some risk in there. But here's where the history gets interesting. And where I make my argument that the stock market over a long period of time has very, very little risk. Let's look at the 15-year. We've had 135 15-year examples so far. 0, and I mean a big, fat none, have ever lost money. So in other words, at no point in history would you have ever have lost money had you been invested in the stock market over a 15-year period of time. Not through any recession, any stock market crash, or any tragic event in US history. Now, it's not to say it can't happen, but I like the track record here. I like what history tells us. And as we expand our time horizon, the numbers continue to get better and better. Not only do we historically not lose money over 25 or 30 years, but the worst we could ever do, historically speaking, is make around 5% a year. Okay, worst case scenario, we invest 25, 30 years, we make 5% a year. That doesn't feel risky at all to me. So now I want to go back to the 3 stock market crash examples that I mentioned earlier. The stock market did lose 46% of its value in the early 2000s. The stock market did lose 55% of its value starting in late 2007. And the stock market did lose 32% of its value in early 2020 as COVID-19 spread globally. But if we're focusing on the long term, we need to zoom this picture out and look at the bigger picture. Check out this graph, which goes back 28 years. Here's what the 2001 stock market crash looks like on this chart. And here's what the 2008 stock market crash looks like on this chart. And then here's what the 2020 COVID-fueled crash looks like on this chart. When we look at it this way, it doesn't look nearly as scary as when we dwell on the short term. Through all of that, 3 scary stock market crashes, if we would have just waited patiently and trusted in the long term, we would now have more than 13 times what we did at the beginning. The market was up 1,300+% over that period of time. Wow, perspective matters. Now, 25 to 30 years probably seems like a long time, because it is. But we need to think about our bigger picture. The primary investment we're going to be making is in retirement. And if we're 20 years old or 25 or 30, we have many decades to go before we can even touch some of this money. And if we're, say, 25 years old, we still have 60+ years left on this planet. So the good news is we have a long time to invest, and we can be patient and let this investing stuff do its thing. Now, I didn't want to bore you with all the numbers, that wasn't my point, but I do think it's important to walk through the reasons why I truly believe investing in the stock market has very low long-term risk. Short term, super high. Long term, I don't lose 1 minute of sleep over this. I hope this helps put the notion of risk into context. I really want you to understand what you're getting into and be 100% confident in the idea of investing in the stock market. You can find all of this data in the resources if you want to learn more. As we move into the specifics of investing, I want to reiterate something. The goal isn't to become filthy rich so that we can swim around in our pool of money like Scrooge McDuck, or to show off all of our fancy crap on social media. No, the purpose is to use these concepts to our advantage in the pursuit of a life of meaning. Impacting others, pursuing work that matters, and redefining the role that money plays in our life.